HOA Power Trip Ends in handcuffs. You won't believe what happened at my daughter's birthday party. Okay, buckle up because this is a wild one. It all started with a birthday party, a seemingly harmless afternoon gathering in my backyard. The kind of event that should have been completely ordinary. But let me tell you, in my neighborhood, ordinary is a four-letter word. It all started when the Homeowners Association cops fined me for hosting a birthday party. And it was until the mayor showed up. Actually, I just violated a city ordinance. 5 years ago, I made the compromise to move to Stonebridge Heights, a small, meticulously manicured community just outside Austin, Texas. It was supposed to be a quieter life for my then wife, Jenna, who craved stability, while still allowing me to keep my career as a freelance consultant running smoothly. The houses all looked a little to similar. The lawns were a little to perfectly trimmed, and the HOA was a little too involved in everyone's lives. But back then, I brushed it off. Then the divorce happened. Jenna left, and I stayed. The house felt cavernous, the silence deafening. I buried myself in work, desperately trying to avoid dwelling on the wreckage of my personal life. Over time, the cookie-cutter mailboxes, the draconian trash schedules, the mandatory color-coordinated holiday reefs, they all faded into background noise until Gerald Whitmore, the embodiment of HOA tyranny, made it impossible to ignore them. Gerald had been the HOA president for what felt like an eternity. He was the kind of man who thrived on rules, who carried himself with an air of superiority that suggested he owned not just his house, but everyone else's. He didn't need to be loud or aggressive. His power resided in the subtle, insidious ways he exerted control. Letters slipped into mailboxes, fines appearing without warning, and the smug, politely veiled threats that people like him seemed to master. I'd had a few minor skirmishes with him before. A holiday light display deemed too bright, leaving my trash being visible from the street for an extra hour. Petty offences, perhaps, but not worth the battle. Then came my sister Rachel's daughter's birthday. Sophie was turning 7, and she desperately wanted a backyard party with a bounce house. Rachel's place was too small, so I volunteered mine. A simple solution, or so I thought, until Gerald Whitmore decided to intervene. The party started at noon. The Texas sun beat down. The air was thick with the aroma of grilling burgers and the sounds of children. Laughter echoed across the lawn. Kids ran wild, their small hands sticky with melted popsicles, while parents chatted in small groups, plastic cups in hand. Music played softly from a Bluetooth speaker, nothing loud, nothing disruptive. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon in suburbia. Harmless, forgettable, or so I thought. Then Gerald arrived. I spotted him from the corner of my eye, a tall, rigid figure striding up the driveway with the self-assuredness of a man claiming his own property, not stepping onto mine. Conversations around me faltered, the atmosphere shifting in that palpable way it does when something unwanted enters a space. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. I turned, already bracing myself for trouble. "Gerald," I acknowledged him. He held out a folded piece of paper. "You're in violation of HOA regulations." I didn't take it. "For what?" Gerald sighed, as if disappointed in my ignorance. "No large gatherings of more than 10 people without prior approval." His eyes flicked pointedly to the bounce house, then swept over the assembled crowd. "This is unauthorized." I couldn't help but laugh. "Gerald, it's a kid's birthday party." His expression remained unchanged, a mask of stern disapproval. "Rules are rules." Anger surged through me, sharp and immediate. "This is my house." Gerald tilted his head slightly, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "And this is a governed community." He extended the paper again. "You have 7 days to pay the fine. $500. If unpaid, it increases to $1,000. Rachel appeared beside me, her face tight with barely suppressed fury. "You're fining my brother for letting me throw my daughter a birthday party?" Gerald didn't even acknowledge her. "Failure to comply may result in additional penalties." Then he turned and left, as if what he had just done was nothing more than routine. I stared at the fine in my hand, my pulse pounding in my ears. Around me, people murmured, shifting uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. This was how it worked here. You could be angry, frustrated, but you couldn't fight back. At least, that's what Gerald believed. What he didn't know was that I had a friend arriving later that afternoon, Daniel Reyes, the mayor. We'd been best friends since college, and he wasn't some untouchable politician. He was still the same guy who used to eat gas station tacos with me at 3 o'clock in the morning during finals week. He had already planned to swing by the party later that afternoon. When he arrived, everything changed. I told him what had happened, my voice still tight with frustration. Daniel listened, quiet and attentive, his brow furrowing as he read the file. Then, without a word, he pulled out his phone. Within an hour, a city inspector and a police officer were at my door. Gerald came back, of course. He must have heard the commotion. His face was a mask of fury as he stormed up the driveway. "What's going on here?" Daniel turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Gerald," he said, his voice even and controlled. "We have a problem." The city inspector held up the file. "Mr. Calloway's gathering is in compliance with city ordinances. However, a HOA is in violation of Municipal Code 32(4)B, which prohibits the HOA letters from enforcing regulations that contradict city law." Gerald's mouth opened slightly, but he remained silent. The police officer stepped forward. "Issuing unlawful fines can be considered fraudulent conduct under state law." A tense silence hung in the air, the party having ground to a complete halt. Parents clutched their children's hands. Neighbors lingered on their lawns, all eyes glued to the unfolding drama. Daniel took a slow step closer to Gerald. "I'd like to see a full report of every fine you've issued under unauthorized HOA policies." I saw it then, the briefest flicker of fear in Gerald's eyes. I didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but I knew one thing. Gerald did, and for the first time since I had moved to Stonebridge Heights, he was the one who was afraid. Gerald's fingers twitched at his sides, his jaw tightening as he glanced from the city inspector to the police officer, then back to Daniel. His usual smug confidence wavered, just for a moment, before he straightened his shoulders. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice sharp but not as steady as before. "The HOA has every right to enforce community guidelines. The HOA doesn't override city law." "Gerald," Daniel countered smoothly. "You know that, don't you?" A muscle in Gerald's cheek twitched. He wasn't used to being questioned like this. Not publicly, not with half the neighborhood watching. People were creeping closer now, stepping off sidewalks, forming small clusters to hear what was happening. I spotted my neighbor Mark standing near his driveway with his arms crossed, his wife clutching his elbow. Across the street, Mrs. Patel, who had been fined the previous year for having a small vegetable garden in her yard, lingered on her porch, her eyes narrowed. Gerald must have noticed them, too, because his lips pressed into a thin line. "This is a private matter," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Not anymore," Daniel replied, pulling out his phone. "I think a lot of people would be interested to know how you've been running things around here." Gerald's face darkened. "This is not your jurisdiction." Daniel didn't even blink. "Actually, it is." He turned to the inspector. "How many of these fines do you think were issued illegally?" The inspector flipped through his clipboard, skimming the papers before exhaling sharply. "If this one is any indication." He looked at Gerald, meeting his gaze for the first time. Gerald hesitated, ever so slightly, but I saw it. The tiniest crack in his carefully constructed facade, the way his hand flexed slightly at his side. I felt something shift in the air. Gerald wasn't untouchable. Melissa Jacobs, one of the whole board members, arrived, looking flustered. She was younger than Gerald, mid-40s maybe, with sharp features and a professional bob that always looked freshly styled. She pushed through the crowd, coming to a stop just behind him. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing around, a voice edged with confusion. Gerald didn't answer. Daniel handed her the file. Nick was cited for hosting a legal gathering on his own property. Melissa read it, her brows drawn together. I saw the exact moment she understood. Her mouth tightened and her gaze snapped to Gerald. "Is this true?" He didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. Melissa inhaled sharply, stepping aside as the city inspector addressed her directly. "We're going to need the HOA's full record of fines issued in the past 5 years, as well as any documented evidence supporting them." Melissa blinked. "The past 5 years?" The inspector nodded. "Given the circumstances, we have reason to believe that multiple residents may have been fined in violation of city law." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, some whispering to each other. Others looked at Gerald with a mixture of suspicion and something else, something heavier. Realization. I saw Mark shift his weight, frowning. I saw Mrs. Patel clutch the railing of her porch. I saw Rachel cross her arms, eyes dark with something close to satisfaction. Because now, it wasn't just about me, it was about all of them. Gerald opened his mouth as if he were about to argue, but then he must have realized how many people were watching him, how many eyes were waiting. Because his fingers curled into fists and he turned to Melissa, his voice quiet but firm. "We'll discuss this later." Melissa hesitated before nodding stiffly. "Of course." I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt like I had won. But when Gerald turned back to me, his gaze lingering just a second too long, I felt something else entirely, a warning. This wasn't over. Not even close. Gerald walked away that evening, but I knew it wasn't over. Men like him don't go down quietly. He would fight this, twist it, do whatever it took to maintain his grip on the HOA and his little suburban empire. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed as he disappeared down the street. He wasn't just thinking about this fine. He was thinking about all the fines, all the money, and if I had to guess, he was thinking about what would happen if people found out the truth. So, I made sure they did. The moment Gerald left, people started talking. Whispers turned into conversations, conversations into frustration, and frustration into action. Neighbors started digging out old HOA violation notices, flipping through them, comparing them. That night, my inbox was flooded with emails and texts, people sending me scanned copies of fines they had paid over the years, $150 on non-compliant garden decor, to $100 or unapproved mailbox color. The pattern was clear. Gerald had been running a racket, and the total amount of fines issued over the past 3 years amounted to over $75,000. The best part, HOA had no official documentation backing any of them. Melissa, who had been visibly shaken since the confrontation with the city inspector, called me 2 nights later. She was rattled. I checked the records. A lot of these fines weren't even approved by the board. Gerald was just issuing them on his own. I almost laughed. I should have guessed. He hadn't just been enforcing HOA rules. He'd been making them up as he went. Melissa wasn't stupid. She could see which way the wind was blowing. The board is meeting next week, she said. There's talk of forcing Gerald to step down. That was good, but it wasn't enough because I didn't just want Gerald out. I wanted him to pay. For real, that one nail in the coffin. I reached out to Daniel. How much trouble can he actually get into for this? I asked. Daniel thought for a moment, then smiled. Depends on how far you want to take it. I didn't hesitate. All the way. The next day, Daniel sent me something, an illegal complaint form. See, when an HOA finds someone, that money is supposed to go toward community upkeep, not into some secret slush fund. But Gerald, being the slimy piece of work that he was, had been pocketing a good chunk of it. How did I know? Because after digging through public records, Melissa found a secondary bank account in the HOA's name, one that the rest of the board had no knowledge of. Guess whose name was on it? Gerald Whitmore. The man had been running an embezzlement scheme right under everyone's noses. And now we had proof. The night of the whole board meeting, the room was charged with tension. Gerald walked in looking as smug as ever, but there was something different this time, a stiffness in the way he carried himself, like he knew something was coming. And he was right. Melissa stood up first. She laid it all out. The unauthorized fines, the missing records, the hidden bank account. Every single board member was furious. Gerald tried to defend himself, claiming it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, an accounting error. But he wasn't talking to scared homeowners anymore. He was talking to a room full of people who wanted his head on a platter. Then Daniel stood up. As of today, he said, an official fraud complaint has been filed against Mr. Whitmore with the city's financial crimes division. The rumor erupted. People started shouting, demanding refunds, demanding his resignation. Someone called him a crook. Someone else called him a thief. Gerald's face turned red, then purple. He was cornered. Then came the best part. 2 police officers walked in. Mr. Whitmore, one of them said, we need you to come with us. The room went dead silent. Gerald froze. You can't be serious. The officer pulled out a folder. You're under investigation for financial fraud. You can come willingly, or we can do this the hard way. I will never forget the look on his face. The once untouchable HOA tyrant was being led out of the building, humiliated, defeated, finished. And the moment the door shut behind him, the entire room burst into applause. Gerald was formally charged with embezzlement and fraud. Turns out, he skimmed over $30,000 on bogus HOA fines. He lost his position, he lost his reputation, and after a lengthy legal battle, he was ordered to pay back every single cent. As for the HOA, Melissa took over as president, and the ridiculous restrictions were wiped off the books. No more petty fines, no more useless rules. And me, I threw the biggest damn block party his neighborhood had ever seen. No HOA nonsense, just good music, good food, and one very satisfying sense of revenge. So, Reddit, tell me, do you think I handled the situation correctly? Was taking it as far as I did justify? Or should I have just let it go? I'm curious to hear your thoughts and opinions on this whole HOA nightmare and how I decided to confront it. Lay it on me, what would you have done differently? Please give me your honest assessment so I can know if I was in the wrong or not.